Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Danny, and I'm with the learning team at Cherry Bekaert. Just want to go over a few housekeeping items before I turn it over to Bryce for today's presentation. For audio during today's webinar, you may listen through the phone or the computer speakers. You can choose your audio under the Audio tab in the menu to the right of your screen. To earn CPE for today's webinar, make sure that you answer all the polling questions. Make sure to click the submit button to submit your answer. Instructors will try to remind you of this as each poll appears. The instructor and I will also answer questions in the question and answer pod. We will try to answer them throughout the webinar. So that's all for the housekeeping items, and I will turn it over to Bryce.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's an early start this morning. I'm glad everybody could join us. To get started real quickly, I want to give everybody some quick information in the upcoming topics and remind everybody that this is day one of a 4-day series. Registration is still open at cvh.com in the event section. All events are going to begin at 8:30 Eastern time this week. Our goals are to share best practices. What I'm going to try and do today is share some of the best practices around analytics. And make sure that those resources are available and affordable. The other topics to look forward to in this 4-day series is how the deal was made, case study on Judson Mill, distressed real estate post-COVID-19, and year-end planning for real estate and construction. So those are our upcoming topics. Please take advantage of the opportunity to, I know some of those speakers have some fabulous content. So if you get a chance, make sure that you get registered if you haven't already registered for those events. To get started today, let me tell you a little bit about me and why I'm here, and ultimately what I want to help all of you understand a little bit better today and maybe get your arms around. So my background is I've been both a chief information officer and a chief marketing officer. Now, a lot of people say, wow, that is a weird combination. Well, it is a weird combination, but what it really helped with and where it helps apply to analytics is there's always a balance between technology and business. And on the marketing side, really understanding go-to-market strategy and the operations around going to market, as well as understanding the technology. For the last 10 years, I've been focused on helping companies leverage their data. Isimo, now Isimo Analytics, was acquired in February, and that was a company that I was a co-founder of, and we helped companies of all sizes across all industries, but also had a significant focus in the real estate and construction space. Additionally to that, I'm an adjunct professor at Duke University's Fuqua Graduate School of Business, where I teach data visualization and analytics. And so we're going to hear a little bit about that. Personally, my background, I've had 6 startups. I've been part of 6 startups where I've either been a co-founder or a single-digit employee. And I look at myself as, you got to measure everything with statistics. I have a 4-2 record. And so I feel like I'm on the winning end at the moment, batting pretty well, and excited to share some of those experiences today with you all. So let's get started. I always like to start with a poll question to really get our arms around where we're thinking about data and how data is coming into play. So if we can go ahead and get our first poll question answered and going here. I'm interested, do you currently have a formal data strategy? Looking forward to seeing these answers as everybody starts to log in and get those answered. Got 80% of the vote in. This is like election night all over again. With 84% of the vote counted, we've got no data strategy leading, and not sure whether we have one, tied for second. All right. Going to give you a few more seconds here to fill out the poll to make sure we get our CPE today. All right, we closed out that poll. What's interesting about that poll is we ended up with 55% of you saying no. We don't have a formal data strategy. 20% saying yes, 20% saying not sure, and 5% of you who really feel like you need one and have been pushing for it, but haven't gotten there yet. Well, I'm going to tell you right now that that's pretty typical. As we think about how all of things come together, I'm going to share a little bit about how those results really fit in. What we're going to do today is we're going to really break this down. I'm going to break it down into how we leverage data, how analytics play into leveraging that, and then I'm going to tie it back to how we've seen organizations in the real estate and construction space take advantage of what they can do with analytics. But first, I'm going to take you back more to an overall view of the landscape, the environment that we live in today relative to these things. Right now, only 16%. 16%. So those of you that said yes, you're ahead of the curve. Only 16% of organizations say that they can get data in the hands of 3/4 of their employees. Now let's think about that. Let's think about what that means and dissect that a little bit deeper. Because if we dig into that just a little bit and we think about that, that means that we're keeping people from having all the information that they might need to make a better decision. If only 16% of organizations can say that is a tremendously low number, and we have a lot of room to really grow that opportunity. And quite honestly, we need to take advantage of that, because another big environmental impact, when we think about what's happened this year with the pandemic, and we think about the impact that's had on all sorts of businesses, the real estate and construction market included, in sometimes very different ways. We weren't really thinking about disruption. It wasn't top of mind. McKinsey released earlier this year how companies that are really putting data in front of them, so they're taking into account not just the things that they know, but some of the things that are possible, not being paranoid about it, but just making sure that we take that into consideration. McKinsey released this evaluation of disruption. And in this evaluation of disruption, it looks at the magnitude and the cost and our ability to anticipate. And if we have the high ability to anticipate and we have a high magnitude, then we need to be taking it into account as we think about what could and what could possibly happen. And I think something that's very important as we think about leveraging analytics and leveraging data, and when we start to think about our data strategy and do we have one, we have to think about what are all the factors that play into what we have. What's kind of scary in this picture is that a pandemic is fairly easy to anticipate on the overall scale. The magnitude is high, obviously, but the reason a pandemic is because we see them happen at certain intervals. If you go back, one of the things that it showed us is that as we go back, we see these potential pandemics causing disruption frequently throughout periods of time, not to the magnitude that we've seen this year, but it is something that we should always play into. But there are other things in here, and one of the things, cyber attacks have been a big one that have been talked about in the news because those have gone up as the pandemic has gone on. The other thing we have to think about data is the sheer magnitude. Now, this number is from Ford Motor Company. Now, what's important to understand is when I talk about having worked with companies over the last 10 years, just focused on their data and what they do with data, we've worked with companies that are 300 billion in revenue and have data similar to this size and scale. But we also have companies that are 250 million in top line annual revenue. They don't have data at the 90 terabytes of data a month or 25 petabytes of data a month, but they have data that is moving along that same spectrum that's available to them. And as more data comes in, if we don't have a data strategy and we're not leveraging it, then we aren't thinking about that data, then we have to think about how are we going to be successful with analytics. Gartner, no relation to me, has built an analytics ascendancy. Now, as you think about analytics ascendancy and how analytics play into what you do and how this manifests itself into helping you as a business, Harvard Business Review, MIT, all of these schools have put out that organizations that use data and analytics are more successful than those that don't. And by a significant percentage, it helps them be more effective in the marketplace. It helps them do things better in the spaces that they occupy because they have a better understanding on this ascendancy model. And again, analytics aren't for only the big of big companies. They are for everyone, and it can quite honestly be a huge differentiator for smaller companies to take advantage of. So when we think about ascendancy, we think about, and how Gartner looks at this is, if we increase value, we're increasing difficulty of our analytics. So we move through from descriptive analytics, which is what we all tend to use in reporting, and diagnostic analytics, which is a little bit deeper reporting and getting to a little more understanding, maybe some correlated relationships. So why did it happen? Then getting into where we're forward thinking about what's going to happen and how can we make it happen. Now, what's important about this and what's important to understand is that as we work our way through that, we're moving up in value. The other thing that's important to understand, and this is where I challenge the way Gartner presents this, being a teacher of data visualization, I feel like one of the challenges that their model proposes is it looks like when we get to prescriptive analytics, that we've reached the pinnacle of our success. Well, in prescriptive analytics, where we're prescribing something for someone or for our business, that isn't necessarily the pinnacle because prescriptive analytics can't exist without descriptive. And so I like to look at it this way. We put data at the center of it all, and we surround it with the best analytics that we have. We still have a degree of difficulty and a degree of value that are correlated. But in looking at those things and in how we take those things, we can't forget or de-emphasize one because we've moved to the next level. Descriptive and diagnostic help us drive and build better models that lead to better predictive analysis. So here's our second poll question. This one has a correct answer based on what I just talked about. So let's go ahead and get that poll question going. What type of analytics provides the greatest value but with the most difficulty? All right, we've got everybody moving forward on this poll. Gonna have to grab everybody's attention a little bit stronger. Got 82% of the vote in. All right. We had 40% of you who said predictive analytics. We had 38% say prescriptive. The correct answer is prescriptive. Prescriptive analytics requires the level of degree of difficulty of predictive, but adding an element where we give somebody an outcome, where we need them to understand what to do, what action to take based on what happened in the predictive analysis. So as you think about this, we work through our descriptive, we work through diagnostic, we work our way into predictive, and then once we can feel confident in predicting, we can then prescribe solutions for what we want to do. There are 3 common mistakes. Before I get into telling you how we can really attack this, I always like to get people to think about the things where we make mistakes getting into analytics. And where do those strategy and mistakes fall when we're trying to get into data and into analytics? And we really have 3 of the most common right here. We have a denial strategy, we have a technology-centered strategy, and then we have what I call instant ubiquity strategy. All of these are guaranteed ways to not be successful. I'm sure many of you who don't have a formal data strategy have dabbled with the data. Some of you with a formal data strategy have probably dabbled and had some failures in that strategy. But where do these problems come into play? Well, mistake number 1 is denial. Denial falls in that category where we have everything, we can drop it into Excel, we have reports for all of our information, we don't need to think about anything differently. Or we can't get at the data that we need, so we're not gonna do anything. That's mistake number 1. That's probably the most common. We either have it all already, or we don't have access to the data that's gonna matter, so we're just not gonna do anything. How many people feel like they've had that? Ask yourself that question. Have you had that? Well, I have that data. Or I already have a report for that. Well, reports present a challenge because a lot of times you need to pull information together from multiple reports to do analytics. If you've ever done a VLOOKUP, you've done that. But a lot of times we don't even take that next step. We try and make inferences from what we see on one report and compare it to another without putting the data together. Mistake number 2 is that we get technology centered. We are looking for the magic bullet that is a piece of software that's going to solve all of our problems. If I just go buy this software, or I start with buying a piece of software, then that is going to solve all my problems. Or that data only lives in IT and they will let us know what it says. Those 2 key phrases are where we see people make the most mistakes around being technology centered. It's not about the technology, it's about the business. It's about the business that you're in, it's about the world that you occupy, and finding the right tools are important because a lot of the things we need to do, we can't do just with Excel. But at the same time, we need to be able to get our arms around the fact that we don't want to just start with the technology or just leave it in the technology group, because we really need to be asking and answering key business questions, which we'll get to in a minute. Our mistake number 3 is that we've got this instant ubiquity strategy. It is, we're committed to being data driven. We're committed to using analytics. We're going to do it everywhere tomorrow. Well, tomorrow, trying to do it tomorrow and do everything is a recipe for failure. It's a recipe for failure because you really need to prioritize. You need to prioritize the things that are most important. You need to attack those first. And we're going to talk about how we do this in just a second. But if you look at those first, those are going to lead you down different paths. If you say the whole organization needs to be engaged in analytics, we're not going to get at the key elements that need to get answered. So our third poll question, making sure all of you get this CPE, is what is one of the most common strategy mistakes? All right, 74% of the vote in. And we've got denial leading. We got a couple data management, some support. Nobody's buying into prescriptive analytics as a mistake. Anybody who hasn't voted needs to get it in. The poll's going to close in a second. All right, poll closed. 79% of you. All right, denial is one of those mistakes. So let's talk about how we're successful. We've talked about the mistakes, but let's talk about how we can be successful. Critical questions are the driver of all analytics. If we don't stop, we don't need to think about the math. We don't need to think about the data initially. What we need to think about are what are our critical questions? What are the elements that impact our preferred future, right? The vision of an organization or the vision of a department or the vision of an individual is all wrapped up in what do we want our preferred future to be. We have to make sure that we align our critical analytical questions to strategic objectives, whether it's goals, whether it's proving a theory, meaning I've always thought that this is how this segment behaves, or how this piece of property is going to play out. I can now use the data to prove that theory. We also have what I call organizational mythology. Anybody who's been in an organization for a long time knows that there is organizational mythology that happens. Most of the time it starts with, well, we've always done this way, or this has always happened, but we haven't used the data to support it. Too many times we've seen people not try and disprove myths. They let the mythology go on and they try and prove new theories. And sometimes that logic and that analytics is flawed because they didn't stop and take the time to disprove what they held true. One of the organizations we worked with had some of those long held beliefs. They're a 75-year-old organization. They know what's going on in their business. They thought they had nailed what their market looked like. They knew it inside and out. When they dug into the data, there were 5 aspects of that data that they were confident they were 100% right on. They got 1 of those right. And those were significant elements that impacted their go-to-market strategy, how they interacted with their potential customers, and it completely changed how their organization pivoted to try and reach their preferred future. As we think about critical questions in practice, I'm going to use the example of this global property management group. One of the challenges they had is they were continually struggling with budgeting around property improvements, construction projects, leasing, tenant, all of those different elements. And they really wanted to dive in deeper into financial planning and analysis and their management of properties. Well, the way that they looked at that is they had a global footprint. For them, they were looking for ways to empower their budget owners to be closer to their budget, to be better at understanding where it's going. And they empowered everybody down to anyone who had any dollar of budget responsibility to be able to see where they were, to be able to forecast better where they were going, and to be able to have that insight. Well, when you take that down to that level of granularity, all the way down to the person who may be responsible for maintenance in one building in Paris, and they now have more control, they can ask and answer questions of the data, they could roll that back up now, and all of a sudden they had much better insight at the leadership level. And you may not be a global footprint company, but I'm going to give you some more examples here in just a little bit of where small companies were able to take full advantage of that same concept by plugging it in and doing it at the scale that they were at, that gave them a lot more feedback. For them, for this company, the impact that it had was better informed executives understanding and having have their arms better around the margin they had at every property and in every investment that they were managing. Another thing that is critical is data elements. This is key to enriching our analysis. A lot of times we put ourselves in a box. In putting ourselves in a box, we think about our accounting, our ERP, our operational systems, or maybe our marketing systems. We think about those things, whether you're on, a big workflow management system, or whether you're on smaller management system, whether it's in the cloud or it's available, it's in your office, it's on premise. We think about that data. A lot of times what we skip are external factors. And some of the external factors that can have a big impact on our industry is regulations and government changes. We have an impact, obviously, of weather. When we think about construction and the impact that that has, we have economic. We have economic changes. We have economic changes related to construction costs. We have economic changes related to maintenance costs and timing and all of those things. But a lot of times we don't think about incorporating that into our data. When all of those things are available, and they're available to us and they're available to bring into our analysis, it becomes very impactful to start to play those out. When you can be a small company. When you take the time to think about what data you have available, it can make a big difference. This online auction company, you may say, well, how does this apply to real estate? Well, they're very much tied to real estate. They're tied to the construction side. The majority of what they sell is heavy equipment for construction projects, driving real estate. Now, as they thought about their goals and objectives and the critical questions they needed to ask, they were really looking to accelerate their growth. They had lots of internal data. They had information about everything anybody looked at on the website. They had information about bidders, people who were bidding, people who were ultimately buying, the kind of companies that were selling products on their site. And but that wasn't good enough for them. They were like, we have all this information, this tells us a lot, but what we want to know is what the impact of these other elements are. What is happening in financing with equipment, with homes? What's happening with the weather? Longer term weather trends. What's happening with home starts in the markets that we're strongest and markets we're looking to move into? What can we do to take advantage of these elements of data that we know that are out there that we can pull in? And so as they did that, they started to pull in this information, they started to add it to their analysis, and they started to combine it. When they started doing this, they were a $15 million company. 7 years later, they've seen 20x growth. They've seen 20x growth in their world because they stopped as a smaller company. They stopped to think about what data could make a difference and how they could apply the analytics to what they were doing. How they could use the data, how they could apply that data, and how they could make more from it. Now, one of the hottest topics right now is when we talk about artificial intelligence and machine learning, and how artificial intelligence and machine learning play into what we can do with analytics. Now, a lot of people say, I hear about AI and I hear about ML and I hear about the things that are out there. I see it every day. If I've shopped on Amazon, I've interacted with AI and machine learning. If I'm designing models that incorporate the key questions, those extra sets of data and our internal data, I look at the outside impacts, I all of a sudden start to narrow the spread of predicted outcomes. I can start prescribing solutions, right? I can start to let the systems give me advice. You know, the best example of this, all of us that are on the East Coast know that as hurricane season starts to arrive in July and August, that we start to see the spaghetti models on the Weather Channel. We see all of those different lines of possibilities of where the hurricane could go. And you've always got some scragglers that are out to the right or to the left of what the path could be. Those models have gotten incredibly accurate. They're incredibly accurate because they don't just take data from one source. They're taking data from lots of different sources. And they're not satisfied with just one set of data. They start to pull all of that in, and then you start to see that bunch in the middle. Well, we've gotten so good at pulling all that data in that we start to get clustered together the models that show the tightest possibility based on all the outside factors. Well, that lets us get a lot more predictable. Let us get a lot more focused around what it is. Well, we've got to take and step into the eye of the hurricane in our business. We have to think about what questions need to be answered. Where are we going? What is the possibility with analytics in our business space? And what is the possibility then to take all of this data and start to build out models and start to build our own spaghetti models, not about where a hurricane's going to land, but where is our business going to land? So an example here is in the real estate investment technology space, a company that had grand visions for how they could change using AI and ML and the data available to them, how they could do underwriting and valuation in a more automated way, in a more predictable way, in a way where they didn't just limit themselves to what they knew about specific properties, but how they could pull in different market factors, how they could pull in and understand the investment stack of a given property, how they could look at the impact of that, and how they could add in key public information and market trends that would have an impact on valuations and ultimately the underwriting of any given property. You know, as we worked with them, they started to get those stops and starts on building out their model to get to what ultimately became their final model for how they put all of this together. What was so interesting about building those models is a lot of times in building the models, there's a ton of trial and error. And too many times we don't let ourselves think about failing. We don't want to fail. Nobody wants to fail. But failure is a big part of getting your model right. You have to test and put the AI and those tests together to start to figure out how we can get to predictive and to prescriptive and how we make that repeatable, right? The key to AI and machine learning is really about how can we make doing a predictive or a prescriptive model repeatable and getting smarter every time we do it? How do we change the input? How do we make that go further? And then how do we take that answer and do more with it? For this company, they got it down to where they could very accurately predict the valuation of any property and therefore drive other things that come out of the valuation of that property. What was the impact to them as a business? They built an advanced platform, and ultimately they were acquired by a company who wanted the ability to be able to take advantage of that, who wanted to be able to take that to a broader market. So my next checkpoint question is another question for what you're doing today. Do you currently share data or data stories in your organization? All right, looks like we're getting everybody voting faster this time. 55% are sharing data, 15% data stories, and 31% right now have no idea what a data story is. Well, that's good because we're going to talk about data stories here in just a second. All right, so we finished up with 55, 15, and 31. That's not unusual. Most people are just sharing data. If you ask somebody for something in your organization, a lot of times they send you an Excel sheet and say, here's what I have. Very few times are people sharing data stories. I can tell you in some of the organizations that are leveraging data the most, they understand the power of a data story. And what a data story is understanding that data is not insightful to anyone by itself. It's not going to engage people by itself. Most people are not data or numbers people. A lot of times we think because I'm a numbers person, I'm a data person, our CFO, formerly at Ismo, big numbers person. We think that because we see what we see in the data, that that's how everybody sees it. That's not how everybody sees it. One of the biggest changes over the last several years is this concept of telling data stories. And you tell data stories, we got to go back to like when we were in kindergarten, right? We have to think about how we put ourselves in the state of sharing things that are going to be engaging, right? How are we going to engage? We want people to use data. We want people to use analytics. But the way we so frequently share data, the way that we share data today so frequently doesn't engage an audience. It doesn't provide insight. It provides rows and columns and numbers that cause people to gloss over. If we do all of this analytics, we work our way through the chain, we get the right questions, we get the right data, and we fail to communicate in a way that engages audiences and demystifies the complex analysis, we fail to deliver the value of what data can bring to our organization. And I'm going to simplify this down real quick, and then we're going to go through a quick story. I'm going to simplify this down because I want you to all think about Cyber Week. We just came off the holiday and the mad shopping event that people are renaming Super Friday or Black Friday or whatever you want to call it. When you go to Amazon or Best Buy or Target or Walmart or wherever you went online to shop, I want you to think about this. When you're looking at a product and it says to you below, other products you might find interesting, or you hit your home page and it says, hey, based on your buying this, you might be interested in that. I want you to think about if that wasn't a picture. I want you to think about if that wasn't a picture. And it was a bunch of numbers that described that, or words that just described that product. Would it get your attention and would it engage you? Would it get you to click on the link and get you to move through it? Get you to understand what that product is? Because in most cases, it wouldn't. In most cases, putting a block of text that described something else that just became a bunch of letters in a box, because you don't take the time necessarily to read it. Or by the time you have 15 of those across the bottom of a screen, it just looks like a word cloud and a blob of words. When you think about that and how that impacts you, how that would impact you, I want you to think about how we oftentimes communicate all of this exciting data that we've figured out from our critical questions and our analysis and driving all of this data. If we don't take the time to communicate it in a way that's going to be engaging and going to be interactive, people learn from interacting with things and grabbing their attention. So I'm going to tell you a quick story. I'm going to take you through an example of how we tell a story utilizing, I'm going to go back one click here, taking us through from construction to portfolio to leasing to occupancy to where our financials are, all in just a few steps. If we think about what's important in a construction project, we put the things that are most important. Where are the buildings that we're currently doing construction? What type of project is? How much of the project is complete, open, and overdue? Where are we from a timing standpoint? And where are we with budget versus invoiced costs? The most important critical points in a way we can understand. And ultimately, when you're working with this in any of the new tools, I can interact and click on the lifestyle tower and really dive into what's happening there. If I needed to go into the detail of these properties, I could dig in and see exactly where we are in each of the steps with each of the properties and get a better understanding of what's happening. So I don't just stay at my high level summary. I can dig into the details if I want to, but I'm giving myself that guided experience. If I need to review and understand what's happening inside the portfolio, how are we doing with all of our properties, with our fair market value, with our loan to value, with our total returns, and where we are with overall occupancy by all of our properties, a quick summary of how those things are playing out. I need to tell that story visually, giving the key things that are most important, but working my way down into all the detail across the board. I'm telling a data story from start to finish. As I look at leasing, what are important things to know? That we have 54 tenants, 21 markets, 28 properties. I can see at all the different locations where our risk timeline is for leases ending. How many do we have falling into each category, updating and being able to see that across the globe, knowing I'm able to drill into any of these things as I think about it, because we want to anticipate the analytics, the next question that somebody's going to ask. I want to start to think about how I engage audiences. I want to think about the audiences that I need to engage and how the best way to understand what's happening. So when I'm thinking about managing a property and managing it down to, in this scenario, this is an example of one where we're managing an individual shared workspace and how frequently are rooms and offices and seats being used, how this fill up time looks over time, how it changes. Are we above or below goal by space? Do we need to reconfigure? How we engage in those elements has a large impact on how we tell our story and how we interact with our story, and more importantly, how the people who need to be making these decisions, whether they're financial or operational or marketing decisions, we need to be able to give them a way to engage that's understandable, that isn't just numbers. At a financial level, we need to tell high-level stories that give us an overall view, that give us insight to exactly what's going on by the key things that matter, but then also still supporting it with the detail that needs to fall underneath that we're all used to seeing. As we pull our story together, you notice we want to always drive a story from our beginning to our end, from our high level to our lower level detail, to get it in the hands of the audiences that need it to make better and more informed decisions. That is telling a data story rather than just sharing data. As we wrap up today, I really want you to think about the 4 elements of being successful with analytics. We need to think about the critical questions first and foremost. We need to try and not answer every question that we might have. We need to prioritize them or work our way through them. When we work our way through the questions, it's amazing. A lot of times we have people that we work with prioritize their top 10. By the time we're to number 4, the priorities have changed. They've changed because we're getting insight to data that has a more important impact that causes different questions later on in the process to need to be asked. Data elements, we've got to get out of our box. Every business, real estate, property management, investment, construction, all have data elements that come from outside our four walls that impact us. We need to identify what those are and identify the ones that we have easy access to and the ones that we don't, because they are going to have an impact on our success and where we're going. We need to figure out when and where we can start to look at advanced analytics. When can we start to apply artificial intelligence and machine learning? When can we take those elements and step them forward? And whether we make it to AI and ML, we can never miss the step of communicating. We need to put ourselves in the receiver's shoes. The person that we're giving the information to, or that we're expecting to make decisions on the information, we need to make sure we're communicating to them in a way that they are going to engage with, that they are going to take advantage of, and the way that they're going to be very comfortable with. By doing those things, regardless of how big of an organization you are or how small of an organization you are, if you work your way through those elements, you will have success and it will have a significant impact on your organization. We've watched it happen with a tiny little real estate investment company all the way up to one of the global leaders in property management. It doesn't matter where you fall on that spectrum. It's just going to change some of the key questions and data elements that come into play. And if we remember not to try, one of our failures, not to try and have instant ubiquity, we work our way through the process, we will be successful. I'm out of time. I want to remind everybody, I want to thank you for attending today and remind everybody about the continued series. Make sure that you take the opportunity to register for the rest of the series that is on cbh.com under the click on the events menu item at the top. And I very much appreciate your time. We do have a little bit of time. If there are any questions, feel free to post them in the questions tab of the GoToWebinar. I'll be happy to try and get them answered. Otherwise, have a wonderful day and enjoy the rest of your week and enjoy the holidays. All right, seeing none, have a wonderful day.